Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. Just a little bit about AirTAP before we get started. We help Minnesota's public and private sector airport professionals improve the safety, quality, and efficiency of airport operations. And we're sponsored by the University of Minnesota's Center for Transportation Studies and the Minnesota Department of Transportation's Office of Aeronautics. And we have multiple training and event opportunities throughout the year to include the annual Minnesota Airports Conference, annual webinar series, and an annual wildlife hazard control workshop. And then we also have electronic and print newsletters available covering airport management and related content relevant to all Minnesota airports, large and small. This webinar is part of the AirTAP technical webinar series designed to provide airport managers and consultants with relevant and timely information to support airport management. And our next one is next month on March 10th. And you can always go to our website to view past webinars, past recordings, I should say. We have another webinar series that's ongoing. The Advanced Air Mobility has a topic coming up next Thursday on February 19th at 9 o'clock covering Advanced Air Mobility National Strategy and Comprehensive Plan. And then just a quick plug for our upcoming Minnesota Airports Conference on April 22nd to 24th. This is at Grandview Lodge in Nisswa. Registration is now available. Go ahead and browse our website if you haven't already to see details and get signed up if you haven't. Just quick housekeeping, your feedback is valuable to us in helping understand your needs and your clients' needs. So we're going to ask you to complete this survey after the webinar today. If you just have 1 or 2 minutes, we would really appreciate it. And then for today's questions, we are going to utilize the chat. If you throw it in Q&A, no big deal. But we'll utilize the chat for questions after today's presentation. And with that, I'm going to hand everything over to Rob Mason, who is an AV rep for the Southern Region with MnDOT's Office of Aeronautics. Rob, take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Natalie, and great to be here. Hopefully you can see me and hear me okay. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and then we will get started. Okay, can everybody see that okay? Natalie, look good?
Yes, that looks great.
Okay, wonderful. So thanks everyone for joining. I'm Rob Mason. I'm the aviation representative for the Southern Region here at MnDOT Aeronautics. I joined MnDOT in June of 24. I'm coming from about 10 years in the classroom as a high school teacher, both in St. Paul Public Schools and at Egan High School, part of the Egan Apple Valley Rosemount School District, where I taught aviation to the junior and senior level, as well as a freshman course on aviation exploration. So education is a huge part of my background, obviously, in my journey. As a pilot myself, it's been a journey of discovery, especially as we get into obstructions. I'll talk about that here in a moment, but super happy to be here. And if you have any questions anytime, drop them in the chat. We will get to them as best that I can after the presentation is over here. So our subject today is on airport obstructions, why removal matters for safety and compliance. And creatively put a instrument approach plate up there with some trees and some brush there on the approach, because that's what we're talking all about, is how to remove these obstructions, the importance of removing them, and best practices and how to do those. We'll look at some case studies as well. So a little agenda here before we get going. We'll talk about what exactly is an obstruction. So we'll define obstruction both in the FAA's terms and for us at MnDOT Aeronautics. We'll talk about how you identify obstructions on 5010 reports that airports receive. Talk about the imaginary surfaces and Part 77 approach types, collection methods, and the process that we follow at MnDOT Aeronautics when we come out to your airport to visit and to conduct a 5010 inspection. We'll talk about the approach surface, the primary surface, the transitional surface, specific effects of obstructions, and mitigation strategies, and as well as a case study, as well as an obstruction control plan. So the FAA's definition of obstructions, Part 77 of the FARs says that an obstruction is an existing object, including a mobile object, is, and a future object would be, an obstruction to air navigation if it is of greater height than any of the following heights or surfaces. The surface of a takeoff or landing area of an airport or any imaginary surface established under 77, 19, 21, or 23. That's very legalese. And so let's think about that, how we approach it from MnDOT's terms here. The minimum obstruction clearance, and this is MnDOT's definition here, the minimum obstruction clearance requires that a structure, a tree, or a mobile object that creates a hazard other than those necessary and incidental to airport operation must not penetrate the imaginary airspace surfaces. And if it does, then it is technically an obstruction and it should be dealt with accordingly. How do we deal with that? We'll talk about that. And to give a little background, I joined MnDOT as a commercial pilot, instrument rated. Um, Thought I was well versed in instrument procedures, and then I got here and realized there's an entire element, Part 77, for the pilots that are on the call. Um, we aren't taught anything about Part 77, navigable surfaces, any of that. So this was a huge learning curve for me. Something I had no idea that it was even out there. This has been personally rewarding for me to learn as a pilot, and I feel actually makes my flying a little bit safer now that I realize the amount of research, the knowledge, and the expertise that goes into quantifying and qualifying obstructions and preserving those navigable and imaginary surfaces. So a little background there. On 5010 reports, when you receive your 5010 report as a Minnesota airport and you're on a 3-year rotation, 3-year cycle, you're going to see a variety of obstacles and obstructions, perhaps. Every airport is different. But if you do receive obstacles and obstructions that are identified on your 5010 report, they'll be situated on the second or third page on an aerial view, and you'll be able to look at the specific number of the obstruction, and then there'll be a color associated with it. So on this particular runway, we're looking at the 14 end. I can see a variety of obstructions, 1403, 1401, 02, 08, 76, and so on. The colors matter though. Objects in red indicate that the obstruction is an actual penetration. It's penetrating the surface, whether that's the primary, the approach, the transitional, what have you. Yellow would indicate a caution object, meaning it's close to a surface. And if it were a tree, for instance, it will grow and become an obstruction in the coming years. And so this is something to keep an eye on. So red would be items that we're going to request correction on immediately following the 5010, and yellow, of course, would be those cautions. If it's not an obstruction, like object 14-06, you can see that the object was taken and thought it might be in the approach surface, but it's actually not. And that happens all the time too. You'll also see in the 5010 report another page that will identify the object specifically and include a photo of it, not just an aerial view, but you'll actually get a picture of the obstacle itself, provided the inspector was able to grab one. Sometimes it's just a grouping of trees, and so you won't actually know which one specifically is. So we'll generally assume that it's going to be the tallest of those trees, tallest of the objects out there. Little about the imaginary surfaces. This is a lot, and I am certainly by no means an expert on this. And this is one of the areas of development here that I've learned a lot over the last 20 months or so of being here at MnDOT Aero. And it's fascinating in many ways, and sometimes not so fascinating in other ways. But when we are coming out to your airport to do a 5010 inspection, we are specifically looking at the primary surface. We're looking at the approach surface, and the items that we may take with our lasers and other collection equipment may look at the transitional as well. We're not paying too much attention to conical. We're not paying too much attention to the horizontal surface. Okay. For those that are unfamiliar, the primary surface is a flat rectangular area centered around the runway, extending 200 feet past each runway end if the runway is paved. Otherwise, it would end at the runway end itself. The width would depend on the approach type, either 250 feet, 500 feet, or 1,000 feet for lower minima and so on. Approach surfaces, those extend outward and upward from the end of the primary surface, varying by each runway category, whether it's a primary instrument approach, or excuse me, precision instrument approach, non-precision, visual, or so on. So something to think about there. And of course, we have a visual approach as well with that non-precision, and transitional surfaces are also a part of this too. But as I said, we're not too terribly interested in the transitional area. When you get a 5010 report, if there's an object in the transitional surface, one of the first things you'll hear us say as the inspector who's on the call is, we're not concerned with transitional, but the FAA may be. Of course, this could change depending on the flavor of particular administrations, if they may be more interested in the transitional than others. As of right now, we're not too nitpicky in the transitional, but it is something that we're going to point out to you, especially if it's a swath of land that the airport itself may own, that it may be simple enough to go out and to remove some of those obstructions in the transitional. Other times it's private property and there's a whole nother process that has to go through there. I'm not going to talk about conical. I'm not going to talk about horizontal, since it's not necessarily in our purview here at MnDOT Aeronautics. So the areas that you're going to see pointed out most often on your 5010, the approach, the transitional, and the primary. These are the specific approach category for Part 77 and each specific approach type. Approach surfaces differ based on the runway type and the approach precision. For visual approaches, the surface begins at the runway end, rises at a 20-to-1 slope. Utility runways have a primary width of 250 feet. Non-utilities use 500 feet. Non-precision instrument approaches, that's a shallower approach, a 34-to-1. Extending roughly 10,000 feet from the runway, and then a precision approach. The most critical is going to be a 50-to-1 slope, and that approach slope begins 200 feet beyond the end of the runway, rises at a 50-to-1 slope for the first 10,000, and then transitions to 40-to-1 for an additional 40,000 feet, creating a total length of 50,000 feet out there. So kind of interesting, and something that, again, was a learning curve when I started. This information readily available. Obviously, we're going to post it as well. Most of you on the call are familiar with Part 77, so we'll leave it at that for now. When we are out collecting and producing information on our 5010 reports, we are going to use a variety of methods and mediums to do so. Cameras, and yes, I'm aware that that is a picture of someone taking a picture on the phone. But it seemed like a good way to convey it. We've got our TruePulse 200X. That's what most of us are using at MnDOT Aero as our laser rangefinder. We've got our GNSS device, which is in most cases accurate to within 0.2 of an inch anywhere, as long as we've got all the satellites working. And then, of course, we may resort to a handheld compass because there's nothing like going old school. And even though there's a compass on the phone now, there's nothing like the reliability of a handheld compass as well. So these are the 4 primary tools that we're going to be using when we come out to survey your particular airport, unless there's some specialized equipment needed for any one airport. The obstruction collection process is about 9 different steps. We set up our instruments when we're about to start hitting some objects, getting everything set up. We're integrating with the MnCore software, which is the satellite systems that we use to integrate our GPS, target the specific obstruction, whether it's a group of trees or a building or a pole or a parking lot or a car or what have you, a roadway out there. We'll begin the position recording, height calculation, distance measurement, and all of that is done using the laser rangefinder, integrating with our devices within our phone and our R2 GNSS device, which again, that item that's accurate to within that 0.2 of an inch, to trilaterate our position anywhere, and then estimate the height of that specific position. If we have got the height, then we can say this has penetrated X number of feet into the specific surface. When this information comes back to MnDOT Aero and we upload all this stuff to the cloud, we have a team of folks here that process the data, that integrate all of that data into the 5010 report itself, that compare all of the data against known FAR Part 77 surfaces that exist for that airport, and we can immediately say, this item here, this specific target, and we've got a latitude and longitude for it, is penetrating the surface. We've got a picture to go with it, and we're going to include that in the packet. All that data is compiled, and of course it's included in the 5010 report, and then we go over it with the airport manager, consultants, and airport representatives who join us on the call. So it's a it, it it's amazing how far we have come. And for those of you on the call who work with other airports in other states, the equipment that's used and the methods that are used very significantly from one state to the other, from one agency to the other. Um, we are fortunate to use very high fidelity, very good equipment here at MnDOT that we stand by and believe in. Let's talk a little bit about the approach surface specifically. Um, Now, our most common approach surface obstructions here are going to be trees, brush, crops, roads. These are the most common obstructions because they occur naturally. Or if it's a road, it's built in an area surrounding the airport or the approach path. Trees and brush grow over time and can penetrate the protected airspace surfaces if not regularly trimmed. Crops, especially tall seasonal varieties, corn, looking at you, can temporarily create obstructions during their growth cycle. So what may be an obstruction in one part of the year is not an obstruction in another part of the year. We see that at so many airports around the state. Roads often run near airports, and vehicles, particularly trucks, can momentarily intrude into those approach surfaces. That's why we've got those transitional heights that we use when we construct these roads, and we assign each of them a value, whether it's a semi-trailer or the height of the highest vehicle that uses the road. We know that and should be able to plan approaches accordingly. Um, these elements are all common because airports are typically located in open or rural areas where vegetation and agriculture dominate, and where road networks to the airport are essential for access. So there may only be one road, and so there may not be a heavy truck road to take. It's all there on one space. So without consistent monitoring and maintenance, these everyday features can easily violate Part 77 surfaces and pose hazards to aircraft operations. So a few photos there, crops, roadways, trees, brush, etc. This is one more image of an approach surface obstruction here. While the trees at the bottom of that gully area may not be the issue, the one rising pine is. And it may only penetrate by 2-3 feet. We advocate for the airport to go out and to remove the obstruction either completely or certainly trim it below its uh, its obstructed path. So why do we need to remove approach obstructions? Well, if an obstacle penetrates the approach surface and we bring it to your attention, and nothing happens as a result of us bringing it to your attention, or it's off airport property, or there's a landowner dispute, what can happen? Well, FAA could step in and restrict or cancel approach procedures. They could raise the minimum descent altitude, the MDA or the DA if it's a precision approach. They could add a not authorized at night. They could add a circling not authorized, meaning you're not able to maneuver around the airport to get to the other runway. If you only have one approach to one particular runway, they may cut off circling to the other runway, effectively shutting down your operations when wind is going in one direction, which is a significant hampering of that airport. So what's the result of all that? Well, it's less operational efficiency. It's reduced ability for pilots to use your airport in all types of conditions. It's critical to remove approach obstructions because they pose a direct safety hazard to aircraft during takeoff and landing. These phases of flight occur at a very low altitude, leaving little margin for error. Any object that's penetrating the protected approach surfaces can interfere with the required obstacle clearance, increasing the risk of a collision. Obstructions can also affect instrument approach procedures, limiting visibility or disrupting navigational signals, which compromises those precision guidance systems like an ILS, like a localizer. Beyond safety, maintaining clear approaches ensures compliance with FAA regulations, preserves airport certification, and prevents operational restrictions that could limit runway use or reduce those approach minimums. Because at the end of the day, we want our airports to be accessible. We want pilots to be able to use them, all types of weather conditions, maybe not all types, but in most conditions where it's safe to fly, a little bit of rain, a little bit of fog, a little bit of low clouds should not keep a competent instrument pilot from visiting your airport. However, they're limited by the approach that's given. And if that approach does not allow flight on that particular day because circling is not authorized or it's not authorized at night due to obstructions, That's business that the airport is not going to receive. All right. This is one view here. Look at that nice clear sky and some palm trees. That looks nice on a day like today. We'd like some clear skies. That's the message to get across here. Primary surface. Talked a little bit about the primary surface already. Same elevation as the runway. 250-foot width, 500-foot width, or 1,000-foot width, depending on the approach and the runway type. Um, if it's a turf, it'd be runway length. If it's hard surface, it extend 200 feet beyond the runway ends. Typical primary surface obstructions that we see here at MnDOT, lots. Brush, crops, tall grass, trees, signs, poles, stakes, vehicles. One that I didn't include here, hay bales. That is a frequent and routine offender. These objects are frequently found near airports because they naturally occur or they're part of everyday infrastructure. Brush, tall grass, trees, they grow over time and can easily penetrate the protected approach surfaces and primary surfaces if they're not maintained. Um, and we obviously have seen the same occur with crops throughout the year, as I mentioned on the approach surface. This is also a primary surface concern. We often see them encroaching into the primary. And airports that are not willfully allowing this to happen, but perhaps those lines need to be redrawn, or you'd like us to come out and mark some lines, and we're more than happy to do that. We've got a few airports on the docket for the spring that we'll be visiting to mark some, do some survey lines to show where crops need to stop. Reach out to our office because we're more than happy to make that happen. We're seeing some other signage there. You can see that radio frequency there in the top right, some frangible taxiway markers, and other runway lighting and things that may be bent or broken. Obviously, that trailer, that would be a no-no as well. So things to think about. And this occurs oftentimes in the middle of summer, peak growth season into the fall. So why should we remove these items? Well, if obstacles penetrate the primary surface, it's not mitigated. Same situation as the approach. FAA may increase your approach minimums. They could mandate a displaced threshold. They could remove the approach altogether, and they could even consider your airport to be an objectionable determination, which would be posted on the sectional and would not be a good thing if the FAA objects to the public airport. Transitional surface. This is the area that we are not terribly focused on here at MnDOT Aero. The FAA could be if they choose to be, but it's going to be the other areas surrounding the approach abutting up to the horizontal and the conical surface as we looked at on our map earlier. This is an aerial view of the Anoka County Airport showing a circling procedure off of the ILS 27 at Anoka. The approach is broken off, head north to join the traffic pattern to fly a normal pattern, a little lower than normal if you're circling, to runway 18 at Anoka. An example of why we need transitional area to be clear, as that is oftentimes a circling, prime circling area. And a transitional surface matters. So why should we remove items there? Well, too many obstructions in the transitional surface would negate a circling procedure, or could be not authorized at night. Those two restrictions alone can severely hamper pilot ability to land at your airport. Any object penetrating those transitional surfaces, trees, poles, structures, they reduce lateral clearance, create collision hazard during low altitude operations. These obstructions can also interfere with emergency procedures, limit visibility, restrict the ability to maintain standard obstacle clearance. Also see this with EMS helicopters. Clear transitional, very important to them. This is a picture you can see on your screen of runway 34. And there are a few items that we took in the approach surface there, the 3407, 3405, 3406, that may not technically be in the approach, but they could be near. The red items, though, that 3410, 3409, 3404, 3402, those would be just offset from the approach. We call those transitional. And that would contribute to this procedure being not authorized at night, especially, excuse me, especially if those obstacles are unlit, unmarked, etc. All right. On the transitional surface, most commonly here, it's going to be terrain. It's going to be trees. Number one and number two repeat offenders for transitional surface obstructions. We will bring those to your attention on a 5010 report, but we are not mandating any transitional surface removal or action, though the FAA could if they deem it to be appropriate. Mitigation strategies. Well, removal is going to be always preferred for vegetation and for permanent hazards. Marking and lighting, that's a strategy as well. For structures that cannot be removed, they should be strongly considered to be marked and lit. FAA has an AC for that. Of course, it's 7460-1M. That's obstruction marking, and lighting is the most current version. However, nothing beats community engagement, proactive outreach and involvement, conflict resolution for those property owners who hopefully you have a good relationship with, but that's not always the case. In those cases, it's important to stay engaged with those individuals, not knocking on the door and saying, "Hey, those need to go now," but having those conversations begin hopefully before they're identified on a 5010 report. We'll talk about that at the end. One case study here I wanted to touch on, excuse me, a case study here I didn't want to put any Minnesota airport specifically on the spot. So this is from Easton, Maryland, Kilo Echo Sierra, November. They had a problem going on for decades with trees penetrating their approach surfaces to runway 422. Action taken over a long period of time. They were able to remove 11 and a half acres of tree obstructions on airport property. They cleared 1 acre off airport and approximately 250 trees on nearby roads. The outcome of this was that they preserved compliance with Part 77, maintained approach surfaces without increasing those minimums, and they had community engagement. They obtained property owner permission. This all kicked off with an environmental impact study way back in 2006. That impact study lasted for 12 years, 2006 to 2018. And obviously needed a lot of buy-in from the public on that. Some lessons learned from Easton's case. Aegis and aerial surveys identify obstructions accurately and early, so the importance of early surveys matter. Multi-year planning, environmental and legal considerations take time. Sometimes they take a lot of time. Stakeholder coordination, property owners, airport authority, MnDOT, if there's partial funding from us, and environmental agencies must be involved. There's also a significant safety impact. Obstruction removal prevents accidents and maintains operational efficiency. It's good for everyone. Unfortunately, that's not always seen that way by certain members of the public, especially when it's on private property. But the benefits of the airport there need to be accurately explained and articulated to those property owners as well. Removal of these trees, easier said than done. We know that. This involves a host of individuals, all with their ducks in a row to make this happen. Property owners, easements, zoning ordinances, environmental assessments, multiple surveys, funding on the CIP, and then MnDOT assistance. And assistance is out there. Please let us know. We've got a few projects right now that are in the works with mitigation around different 77 surfaces. If you want to talk about your specific situation, please reach out. I cover the South. I've got Dimitri Foster with me and Phil Anderson as well. Tim Jarvis, Jim McCanny, and Jared Waddell. We are here for you and would love to help. Obstruction control plan. Give thought to how you'll remove obstacles before they become obstructions. Meaning, these obstructions don't just come out of nowhere. These are typically predictable maintenance items. Trees continue to grow. You may already be aware of repeat offenders in terms of vegetation around the airports, places you are out constantly. You know your airport better than anyone. This involves routine self-inspections. Use your airport's 5010 inspection as a verification tool that you're doing the best that you can in removing those obstructions. Don't use it per se as an identification tool. Don't wait till every 3 years and revisit to determine what needs to be cut. Stay active and stay vigilant. Part of the relationship that we want to maintain here at MnDOT Aero and our 132 public airports is that we can come out and we can visit your airport anytime you'd like. We'll get time on the calendar. We will come to you. More than happy to bring our equipment and to set the laser on as many obstacles as you'd like. Kick that back to the GIS crew here, and we'll map that out, and we can get an exact latitude and longitude of those specific obstructions that you need assistance with. Let the 5010 confirm that your periodic obstruction removal that you're doing on your own is working. Don't wait for us to bring it to your attention. And with that, we have come to the end. I hosted last year's Snow and Ice, and as I watched it back, I realized I think I talked way too long. That comes from the teacher in me that sometimes doesn't know when it's time. So I decided to be a little bit sooner and a little bit quicker on this one. With that, I will take any of your questions that you have, and we can go from there. Thank you so much. Questions, comments?
We do have one in the Q&A, Rob,
Sure.
asking about LiDAR systems.
LiDAR systems.
Would you be interested in having a LiDAR system? I guess I don't know the context of that question.
I'm assuming we're talking LiDAR in terms of obstruction identification. And please reach out to me because that piques my interest. And if that's if that's the genesis of that, let me know. Otherwise, if I'm not understanding, pass that on. Here, let's see. Interested in having a LiDAR system. Yes, I see that. David, thank you. I'm going to follow up with you on that. I had to figure out how to open the chat here or open the Q&A. So thanks. Yes, that's something we'd like to certainly be interested in talking about. Any other Q&A, comments, concerns, questions?
I don't think so.
Wonderful. Oh, here we go. Just another one. Do you consider using FAA airspace studies to determine if hazardous? Well, a couple things with that. If we're talking, we use FAA airspace studies anytime that we're we see them most often in terms of opening a private airport or a personal use on the MnDOT licensing side. But that typically doesn't affect the private airspace, meaning if they were to receive if that airport that kicked off the airspace study were to receive an objectionable determination, they can still construct the airport, but we're not concerned necessarily about those particular obstructions if it's private. How often the FAA is conducting airspace studies around public airports, that's obviously at the outset, these airports with approaches are getting flight checked on a not super often basis, but they do, and there's cost associated with that to run a new flight check. Those can often determine obstructions as well, not just with the navigation aids using it, but identifying the specific surfaces that are involved in that approach. So I'd have to get some more clarification on that. Mark, feel free to reach out to me. Other questions? So as I said, I cover the South. So that's the Twin Cities, south to the Iowa border, Wisconsin border, and then South Dakota. We've got Jared Waddell in the north, Tim Jarvis and Phil Anderson kind of filling in the central region. And then Dimitri Foster is with me in the south as well, while Jim McCanny is in his assistant director role. So please let us know. If there's one takeaway you get from this call today, it's that we want to be your partner in identifying these obstructions before they are brought to your attention on a 5010, meaning we'd like to come out to your airport. In fact, we'd love to come out to your airport and to do some marking to identify specifically where these crop lines should be, because that seems to be a very, very common, I would say, if not the number one issue we see on 5010 reports at rural airports, and most of our 132 are rural, is that we see crops that are over the line, sometimes by a little, sometimes by an extreme amount. And oftentimes the answer we receive from the airport is that, well, we've told the individual, we've told him where he should be, and this that. We're not in the business of enforcing or being punitive here, but it's more education, and that's where we'd like to be involved. So please let us know how we can help you in your airport, whether you're an airport manager watching or you're a consultant representing another airport or just interested party. We want to be there for you to assist. So thank you all again for your time, and please reach out if there's anything we can do to assist you here at MnDOT Aero, and look forward to seeing you at the next winter technical webinar, which is hosted by my friend Chris Gardner in our planning department, and that'll be on March 10th.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rob. Thanks everyone for joining us. I'll follow up with that feedback survey, like I said, and hope to see you next month.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.